we're different. I don't know what else to say on that. We're just different in general, on how we think. We're more of a problem solver, and we need to step back and try to listen. So when you hear your husband saying, try to come up with a fix, just ask him kindly, hey, can you hear me out on what I'm saying? And because in general, women need to talk more and more emotional and let it go through. And guys are like, okay, I'm going to go solve it right away. And there's times where we just need to step back and keep our mouth quiet and listen, and hear what they're saying and be part of the conversation.
I guess I got another two-parter on this one. One is just because your husband or whoever doesn't act the same way you do, or doesn't discipline or react the same way you do, doesn't mean it's wrong. I might be dipping into what my own marriage is like, but I do things a lot differently than my wife, and sometimes she thinks I'm doing it wrong. That's not necessarily the case. A lot of the times it is, but not always. So if, dads or husbands do something a little differently, that doesn't mean it's incorrect. Also, wives, don't expect your husband to know what you're thinking when it comes to everything. We usually mean well, but we always don't know exactly what you want. So sometimes you just got to tell us.
I think I have two things. One thing I think women need to understand is that men, they probably know that men aren't super emotional. We don't always show the lovey-dovey side and that sweet side or that romantic side. So the first thing I guess I would say is that we show our love to other people in practical ways generally. Know that you are loved by your spouse, that your kids are loved by their dad, even though they might not say that. Yes, we need to improve. I need to improve on saying that more often, actually verbalizing it and showing it affectionately, physically maybe. But I think it's important for women to understand that that's not natural necessarily for men, and that fathers and husbands do love their wives and their kids very much, even though they don't always say it. And the second thing is, I think women should know that in the same way that we're not overly emotional, we might not always show it, but we care very much for what they think. We might not care what other people think. I don't really care what strangers think of me, but we care very much for what our wives think of us and our children think of us. And so our wives need to be aware of how they talk about us in public and in front of other people. That's really important. I'm glad that my wife doesn't throw me under the bus often, but when I hear wives throwing their husbands under the bus, I know that cuts to the heart of the man, even though he might not show it. And so I'm thankful for my wife that she supports me and she never does that to me, but I think other women need to recognize that too. That needs to stop. It's common in our culture, and it needs to stop.
Great stuff.
Tony, I think this is a trick question. I don't think they certainly know us a lot more than we know them, and so this is a tough question. But I guess what I would say is when you bring your spouse, again, don't do this during a Cubs game or a Bears game. Do this in the quietness of the things that are not going on. And I know during this time that we have a lot more quietness, but do that in private. So if there's something that we've done, whether it's a project around the house or maybe it's something about leading the family, encourage them as best you can. Say, hey, honey, I really appreciate the way that you did this, or you led the family in this. Those words can be huge in terms of respect and encouraging the heart from a male standpoint. You may think that we on the outside are rough and gruff and some of those things, but when you speak to a man's heart, sometimes we forget about some of those things, right? And we forget about in the busyness of things that the first thing that we see is the outside. But speak to the inside, and that's going to go a long way. And that could also be on the flip side, like, hey, there's some things that I haven't done really well. So, hey, next time let's get somebody that knows a little bit more about this around the house, or let's do this in a different way in terms of leading, or from a discipline aspect. Like, hey, you didn't handle that the best. If you can do that, that is, at least I think men really respond really well to that in terms of that encouraging aspect, and then just those small tokens of appreciation, right to hear.
That's a good question. I would say faith in Jesus, but then also action. That I wasn't just book smart and I just went and learned about it, that I learned about it and also I served and helped other people out. That's probably would be really nice to hear down the road, is that my dad was not only faithful, but he also served and he lived what he said.
This question was a little tough for me. I mean, we all want to be remembered for something. It's just kind of how we are as humans. We always want to have our stamp of something on this earth, whether it's through something on the internet or something in history or through our kids or whatever. And I'm not any different. I guess what I would like to be remembered, we all want to be remembered for something, whether it's, I was a good dad or I was a good husband. But if my kids were to remember me for anything, I would want to be remembered as someone who, like, my dad loved Jesus. Or at my funeral, if my kid only said, now here was a godly man, that's all I would want.
Spiritual legacy is something that's hard to think about when you're young. And so I think about other men who might be in their 20s and 30s as parents, and that might not be the first thing on our mind. We're just trying to get through the day. We got young kids that are very needy, and we got a lot of things going on, whether it's financially or in our careers, trying to establish our careers or get our finances in order. And so I don't think spiritual legacy is something we think about, but the seeds that we plant now with our children will last. And what we say now, in the same way that I think about the great things that my parents taught me when they were young, our parents are going to be thinking about the things that we teach them when we're young too, in our 30s and even in our 20s. And so we need to be thinking about spiritual discipline. That's why the question's good. And secondly, I think we need to be thinking about spiritual legacy, and I think that's why it's a good question. But the spiritual legacy that I want to leave is that Jesus is the most important thing in my life. And I want my kids to know that they're extremely important to me and that my wife is extremely important to me and that I was a hard worker, but I want them to recognize that Jesus was number one. And for them in their life, they have to choose that too. I hope that they choose that because they saw that lived out in their mother's life and in their father's life as well. Something I want them to remember me by, I try to tell my kids often that they bring me joy. And I want them to also experience in that in their life too. I love them, and I tell them that, but I want them to also know that they bring me a lot of joy and happiness because they're a great gift that the Lord has given me, and I hope that one day they can pass that along to their kids too.
So I come from a long line of guys or family members who were great people. They were great people because they were compassionate or nice, and I guess the two words that I would want to them to understand, I guess, would be authentic and then disciple. And for them to know that when you put Jesus first place in all things, like, there's nothing in this earth that is going to stop that. And I look at grandchildren or children after me or family members after me, I want them to know that I love Jesus with all my heart, with all my soul, and with all my mind, and that I loved others, and that I was authentic with those conversations. And so everything else in this life, that this life was not about me, that this life was truly about Jesus. And if I knew that when I was younger as a kid, this life could have been a lot different, but I want them to know that. I want them to know that that there's nothing, that I love the Lord and I can't wait to be with him, but I want the other people in my family to be able to be the disciples that God has called them to be, to share God's word and to do that in amazing ways.